Behind the glittering ballroom of a five-star hotel, a trembling little girl in a torn yellow dress knelt beside a trash bin, one arm clutching a ragged doll, the other digging through garbage bags. When she lifted a moldy piece of bread to her lips, a sharp voice barked, "Don't eat that!" She froze. "I'm sorry. Please, I'm not stealing," she whispered. A lonely man stepped closer, and what he discovered next would bring us all to tears. Nashville's winter wind cut through the narrow alley like a blade, carrying the bitter scent of frozen asphalt and yesterday's trash. Behind the Regency Crown Hotel, its golden lights spilling across the snow-dusted pavement. Ethan Hale stepped out the service door with the same quiet urgency he used to escape every gala he hosted. Inside, chandeliers glittered beside mountains of fresh flowers and champagne fountains. Laughter clinked against crystal glasses. Violins floated through the air like a rehearsed dream. But out here, the music died against the cold brick walls. Ethan pulled in a long breath, adjusting the cuff of his navy blue suit jacket. His reflection in the metal service door stared back at him, polished, successful, envied. A man the world celebrated. Yet somehow, in the silence of the hotel's back alley, all he could feel was the familiar ache spreading through his chest. That crushing emptiness wealth never managed to soften. He tugged his coat tighter, trying to steady himself. "Another night, another circus," he muttered, running a thumb along the faint scar on his wrist, a small reminder of a life that used to mean something. Someone. He forced his thoughts away, focusing on the cold. The cold was easier. Then he heard it, a soft crinkle, barely audible above the wind. A trash bag being disturbed. Ethan froze. At first he thought it might be a stray animal, but the movement was too careful, too small. He stepped closer to the dumpster, shoes crunching lightly against the frost. And then he saw her. A tiny girl 7, maybe 8, kneeling on the icy concrete, her knees pressed into the slush as if she didn't feel the cold at all. She wore a torn yellow dress, far too thin for a winter night, its hem ripped and stained. Strands of light brown hair clung to her cheeks, tangled from wind and neglect. In her left arm, she clutched an old cloth doll, its button eye missing, its fabric worn down to threads. Her right hand was inside a torn trash bag, fingers searching, desperate. She lifted a moldy dinner roll to her mouth. The shock hit Ethan so fast, his voice cracked before he could stop himself. "Hey, don't eat that!" The girl jerked like she'd been struck. The roll tumbled from her hand. She curled into herself, arms around her doll, trembling so hard her shoulders rattled beneath the thin fabric of her dress. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Her voice was little more than a frightened gasp. "Please don't tell my aunt. She'll hit me if she knows I'm out here." Ethan felt something ancient inside him splinter. He crouched slowly, palms open to show he meant no harm. Up close, he could see her tiny hands, red, cracked, almost purple from the cold. The fabric of her dress fluttered around bony shoulders that looked far too fragile to hold a child upright. "It's okay," Ethan said softly. "You're not in trouble." She lifted her head just enough for him to see her eyes, large, doe-like, brimming with fear. And then she did something that stole his breath entirely. She began counting her fingers under her breath. 1, 2, 3, over and over, tapping each finger like a ritual. Ethan's throat tightened. His son, his sweet boy, used to do the same thing when he was scared. Count his fingers like they were anchors, the only things that made sense. It felt like the universe reached out and grabbed Ethan by the collar. A connection spark instant, undeniable, fate-like. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated. Her fingers curled protectively around the frayed edge of her doll's dress. She shook her head as though names were luxuries she no longer deserved. Ethan tried again. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." She looked at him, searching his face with a cautiousness that suggested she had learned not to trust anyone, not even adults who spoke softly. Finally, she whispered, "Lila." A beautiful name, too beautiful for the way she was living. "Lila," Ethan repeated gently. "What are you doing out here alone?" Her lips trembled. Instead of answering, she slowly lifted her doll. It dangled from her hand, limp and fragile. "Mommy said," her voice cracked as she pressed the doll to her chest, "Mommy said someone good would find me. But maybe she was wrong." The wind stung Ethan's eyes. He didn't blink it away. He leaned in, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret meant only for her. Maybe she wasn't wrong at all. Lila swallowed hard, lifting her gaze to him, hope flickering behind the fear, as if she wanted to believe him but had been disappointed too many times to risk it. "Please," she whispered, "don't make me go home." The words hit him like a punch raw, trembling, soaked in terror no child should ever carry. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but the wind swept through again, louder this time, as if pushing them toward a moment that would change everything. And he knew whatever line he crossed next would alter both their lives forever. Before he could decide what to say, the service door banged open behind him. "Mr. Hale?" a hotel manager called, breath puffing white in the air. "They're about to start the charity toast. The governor's asking for you on stage." For a moment, Ethan didn't move. He stood there caught between two worlds, the glittering one inside that worshipped his name, and this frozen alley where a terrified child clutched a ragged doll and begged him not to send her back. He turned to Lila, forcing his voice steady. "I have to step inside for a minute," he said softly, "but I'm coming right back. I promise." Her fingers tightened around the doll. She searched his face, desperate to know if promises still meant anything. Ethan held her gaze, letting her see the truth in his eyes. Then, with a heaviness that felt like betrayal, even though he knew he would return, he straightened and followed the manager through the door, carrying the image of Lila on the concrete with him into the light. He walked back through the service corridor on autopilot, the manager talking about schedules and speeches beside him, but none of it really landed. Every step toward the ballroom felt like a step away from that alley, from the little girl counting her fingers to stay brave in the cold. The moment Ethan re-entered the Regency Crown ballroom, the warmth and noise rushed at him like a tidal wave. Crystal chandeliers spilled gold across the marble floors. Laughter floated above the hum of conversation. A string quartet played something elegant and feather-light, notes that should have filled the room with grace. But somehow everything felt off-kilter, hollow, insincere. He stood near the entrance pretending to scan the crowd, but his heart was still outside in the freezing alley. Every instinct inside him screamed that a child should never know fear like that. A server approached him with a tray of champagne flutes. "Mr. Hale, would you?" "No, thank you," Ethan replied. His voice came out sharper than intended. He inhaled deeply, eyes drifting toward the ballroom's grand mirror wall. His reflection stared back, a man with perfect tailoring, immaculate posture, the face of wealth and control. But the hollow outline of a grieving father stared back too, alone in a room full of admirers, a knot twisted in his stomach. He couldn't stay here. Ethan slipped out again, pushing through the service hall and back into the cold night air. The wind hit him harder this time, but it felt grounding real. Lila was exactly where he left her, sitting on an overturned milk crate, her thin arms hugging the ragged doll against her chest. She wasn't crying. She wasn't complaining. She simply waited, like a child who had learned early that waiting quietly was safer than being seen. When she noticed him, her shoulders relaxed a little, just a little. "I got you something warm," Ethan said, holding out a small container of soup and a piece of bread from the staff kitchen. Lila didn't reach for it. She looked at the food, then looked at Ethan, as if unsure whether she was allowed to want it. Only when he nodded gently did she take it with both hands. She blew on the soup, cautious, almost reverent. As she sipped, a bit of color returned to her cheeks. "That's better," Ethan murmured. She glanced up at him again, her eyes lingering on his wrist. "My daddy had one too," she whispered. Ethan's breath caught. "Had one what?" She pointed, tiny finger trembling just slightly. "A scar, right there. He said it was from saving Mommy once. He told me scars mean you were brave." Ethan slowly curled his wrist inward, shielding the thin white line that cut diagonally across his skin. He had forgotten it was visible, forgotten how his son used to trace it with tiny fingers, asking, "Did it hurt, Daddy?" His throat tightened. "Your father. What happened to him?" Lila lowered her gaze. "He died. Mommy, too. Then Aunt Carla took me. She said I was her problem now." Her voice cracked on the last word. Before he could speak, she reached into the pocket of her yellow dress and pulled out a faded photograph. The image was so worn the faces were barely distinguishable, but Ethan recognized the outline of a woman holding a small child. "My mommy kept this safe," Lila said. "Before she got sick, she told me to protect it. So I try. Even when Aunt Carla says it's trash." Ethan took the photo in his hand carefully, like it was sacred. "It's not trash," he said softly. "It's proof someone loved you very much." She blinked, and for a moment the fear in her eyes lessened. A gust of wind swept through the alley, lifting strands of her hair. Ethan handed the photo back, and she tucked it close to her heart. "What about you?" she asked suddenly. "Do you have someone who loved you?" Ethan startled at the question. Children had a way of asking the exact thing adults spent years avoiding. "I did," he said, voice low. "A long time ago." She didn't press. She simply nodded, as if she understood more than a child should. Her doll slipped from her arm, landing softly in her lap. Ethan picked it up, brushing a bit of dirt from its fabric. "What's her name?" "She's Rosie," Lila whispered. "Mommy gave her to me when I was little. Aunt Carla says she stinks and I should throw her away, but Rosie is all I have left." Ethan returned the doll gently. "Then Rosie stays." A tiny spark flickered behind Lila's eyes, something like gratitude, something like relief. Before Ethan could say anything else, the night air split with a harsh voice. "Lila, Lila, you worthless little brat, get here now!" The girl jumped so violently her soup nearly spilled. Her hands flew to her doll, shielding it like someone might rip it away. "That's Aunt Carla," she whispered, her whole body trembling. "Please, please don't let her see me." Ethan's jaw clenched. His pulse hammered in his ears. He stood, instinctively placing himself between Lila and the mouth of the alley. A shadow moved near the street lamp. Heavy footsteps. A woman muttering curses under her breath. Lila pressed herself against the wall behind Ethan, curling in on herself like she wished she could disappear. "Stay behind me," Ethan whispered. The footsteps grew louder. Carla's silhouette came into view, cigarette glowing in the dark. She looked drunk, angry, dangerous. Ethan's breath steadied. Something fierce, something long buried rose inside him. Not rage, not fear, resolve. He would not let that woman touch this child. Not now, not ever. Carla's outline staggered toward the alley entrance, illuminated only by the trembling street lamp overhead. Her boots scraped against the pavement, each step uneven, angry, careless. The orange glow of her cigarette tip flared as she inhaled sharply. Smoke curled into the winter air like a warning. She was muttering half-curses, half-drunken threats words that didn't fully form but carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to hurting things smaller than herself. Lila shrank behind Ethan, gripping Rosie the doll so tightly her knuckles turned white. He could feel her trembling against the back of his coat, each shaky breath brushing like feathers against the fabric. Carla's voice slashed through the cold. "Lila, you think you can hide from me? I'll drag you back myself." Ethan stepped deeper into the shadows, shielding Lila from sight. Carla moved in a small circle, drunk and irritable, kicking a loose soda can out of her way. Her eyes scanned the alley, unfocused but angry enough to be dangerous. Finally, with one last string of curses, she stomped back toward the street, cigarette tossed aside, sparks scattering on the ground. When her footsteps faded, Lila's body collapsed against Ethan's leg as if her bones had finally given out. He knelt, placing a steadying hand on her shoulders. "She's gone," he whispered. "You're safe now." Lila didn't answer. She only nodded, too afraid to believe safety could last longer than a few seconds. Ethan's chest tightened. No child should understand fear like this. No child should identify the heaviness of footsteps or the tone of danger so easily. "Come with me," he said gently. "Let's get warm." She hesitated for a heartbeat, then followed, small steps shuffling behind him. Her doll dragged slightly against the ground. The moment they stepped through the staff corridor door, Lila gasped. Heat blasted from the vents, a wave of warm air heavy with the scent of coffee, detergent, and the faint trace of vanilla pastries from the hotel bakery. She stopped short, eyes wide. "It's warm." Ethan glanced down, understanding far more than she could guess. "Yes, it's warm, and it's yours for as long as you need it." She looked at him as if he had spoken in another language, one she had long forgotten. He guided her through the back hallway, passing uniformed staff who glanced curiously but said nothing. Ethan Hale rarely walked through this wing. His presence alone told them something unusual was happening. Inside the hotel infirmary, soft lamplight cast a gentle glow over the room. Cabinets of medical supplies lined the walls, and a couple of beige recliners sat near a small sink. It felt sterile, but safe, like a place for rest. Maria Delgado was there, sorting bandages. Her gray hair was pulled into a neat bun, her warm brown eyes both sharp and kind. She turned immediately, sensing the shift in the air. "Mr. Hale?" she asked, eyebrows lifting. Then her gaze fell on Lila. The nurse's eyes softened. "Oh, sweetheart." Lila shifted behind Ethan again. It was instinct, a child's version of survival. Maria approached slowly, lowering herself to the girl's height. "Mi niña, you're freezing. Can I take a look at you?" Her voice was warm, gentle, the way grandmothers spoke to frightened grandchildren. Lila didn't move. She only looked up at Ethan, waiting for permission. "It's okay," Ethan said softly. "She's kind. You can trust her." For a moment, Lila didn't breathe. Then she stepped forward. Maria examined her carefully. As she lifted the sleeve of the yellow dress, a dark bruise blossomed across Lila's upper arm. Another wrapped around her wrist, thin and angry. Maria inhaled sharply. "These aren't accidents," she whispered, voice tight with controlled anger. Not even close. Lila clutched Ethan's sleeve, her small fingers curling into the fabric. Ethan placed a hand on her back, steady and solid. Maria looked up at him. Who did this? Lila didn't wait for Ethan to answer. My aunt, she murmured. She gets mad. A lot. Maria closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself. Then she lifted Lila's chin gently. No child deserves this. Ever. Something shifted inside Ethan, something deep, something old. A protective instinct he thought had died with his son stirred to life, fierce and undeniable. Maria watched him carefully. There was recognition in her eyes, like she understood the war going on inside him. Mr. Hale, she said quietly, you didn't find this child by accident. Some things happen because they're meant to. Maybe this is the moment life gives you to heal. Ethan looked away quickly, swallowing hard. He didn't want anyone seeing how much those words hit him. But Maria wasn't wrong. The hollow ache that had lived inside him for years was suddenly shifting, becoming something else, something with purpose. To distract him, Lila wandered toward the sink. She reached out, twisting the faucet. Warm water gushed out. Lila jerked her hand back with a startled gasp. It doesn't hurt? She asked, voice small, bewildered. No, Ethan said softly. Warm water isn't supposed to hurt. She touched it again, slowly this time, letting the warmth slide across her fingers. Her eyes glistened. I've never had warm before. The sentence was a knife. Ethan felt it clean through his ribs. He took a blanket from Maria, draping it around Lila's shoulders. She melted into the fabric, hugging Rosie and the blanket all at once. He lifted her onto one of the recliners. Her legs dangled, barely reaching the edge. She curled up like a kitten, letting the heat soak into her bones. As Ethan tucked the blanket under her chin, she whispered, Please don't send me back. She locks me in the closet when she's mad. It's dark, and I can't breathe in there. Ethan went still. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. A wave of emotion surged through him, fury, sorrow, protectiveness, guilt for every time he'd walked through life with blinders on. He knelt beside her. I'm not sending you anywhere. Not tonight. Lila blinked at him, as if trying to memorize his face. Every line, every shadow afraid she might blink, and it would disappear. She whispered, Thank you. It was such a small sentence. But for Ethan, it felt like the world had cracked open. He knew then, without understanding how or why, that nothing about his life would ever be the same again. Even after Lila drifted off in the infirmary recliner, curled beneath the blanket, with Rosie tucked under her chin, his mind refused to quiet. He sat in a nearby chair, elbows resting on his knees, watching her chest rise and fall in tiny, delicate breaths. Every few minutes she whimpered softly in her sleep, flinching as though bracing for a blow. Each time, Ethan reached out instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face, offering a quiet reassurance. You're safe. I'm here. Maria stayed for a while, too, pretending to reorganize medical supplies, though she kept glancing at the little girl with a grandmother's protectiveness. When she finally left, she squeezed Ethan's shoulder. You'll know what to do in the morning, she said. Let your heart guide you. Let your heart guide you. He had not trusted his heart in years. But tonight, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He could not let this child return to that woman. Before the sun rose, Ethan made the first choice that truly mattered in years. He canceled every meeting for the next day. His assistant, confused, asked whether it was an emergency. Yes, Ethan replied quietly. A very important one. When Lila woke that morning, she looked around the infirmary with a dazed expression, as though she expected everything— warmth, blankets, safety— to vanish with daylight. Her eyes found Ethan sitting in the chair beside her, still in the same navy suit, tie loosened, exhaustion carved into his features. "You stayed?" she whispered. "Of course I did," he said. His voice was gentle but firm, as though he couldn't imagine doing anything else. Her shoulders dropped in relief, a small, heartbreaking gesture that told him she had never known such devotion from an adult before. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She nodded shyly. They walked through a quiet service corridor, the early morning hotel buzz just beginning. A few housekeepers nodded politely, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Mr. Hale never walked with anyone like this, especially not a small, frightened girl. In the staff dining room, Ethan handed her a plate of scrambled eggs, fruit, and warm toast. Lila stared at the food as though it were a sculpture, something to be admired, not touched. "You can eat," Ethan reassured. "It's yours." She reached for a strawberry timidly, waiting for some punishment that never came. When she finally took a bite, her eyes fluttered closed, and a soft sigh escaped her lips. Ethan felt something tug behind his ribs. After breakfast, he guided her to his car, a sleek black SUV waiting at the loading dock. Lila hesitated before climbing in. "Is it okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "You're safe with me." She climbed in carefully, Rosie held tight, like she feared the doll might vanish if she loosened her grip. The pediatric clinic they visited was a calm, warm-colored building with friendly murals on the walls. But as soon as they entered, Lila shrank against Ethan's leg, eyes wide. Hospitals, or anything resembling them, were clearly tied to painful memories. Ethan leaned down. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm not leaving." The doctor was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes named Dr. Sanders. She examined Lila with professionalism and compassion, but as the X-rays appeared on the screen, her expression darkened. "These fractures," she murmured. "Some are old, some newer. This child has been abused for years." The words hit Ethan like a blow to the chest. Lila looked up at him anxiously, misreading the doctor's tone. "Are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong?" Ethan immediately knelt in front of her. "No, Lila, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. Do you understand me?" Tears pooled in her eyes, but she nodded. When the examination ended, Ethan stepped aside to speak with Dr. Sanders in private. She didn't soften her words. "She cannot go back to whoever did this," the doctor said firmly. "It would be criminal." She let out a slow breath, her eyes softening when they moved from the X-rays back to Lila's small frame. "I'm required to report this," she added gently. "Child Protective Services will open a case. They'll need to talk with you, Mr. Hale, and with whoever is claiming to care for her. It won't be fast, but it will be the start of something safer for her." "I know," Ethan replied, jaw tight. "I won't allow it." By the time they returned to the hotel, Lila was exhausted, too small, too fragile, too weighed down by more fear than any child should carry. Ethan led her to one of the hotel's luxury suites, the kind reserved for VIP guests. Soft carpeting, warm lighting, a king bed with a plush duvet, and a view of Nashville's skyline waking up in the morning sun. Lila froze in the doorway, her breath catching. This is for me?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Tonight, and as long as you need. And Maria will stay with you." Maria entered with a warm smile, carrying a small bag of toiletries and extra blankets. "Come here, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's get you settled." Lila walked inside on tiptoe, like she feared the floor might disappear beneath her. She touched the soft comforter with trembling fingers. "It feels like clouds," she whispered. "You deserve clouds," Ethan said quietly. Lila crawled into the bed slowly, as though she expected someone to yell at her for wrinkling the sheets. But when no one scolded her, she curled tighter beneath the covers, her face sinking into the pillow. Ethan dimmed the lights. A nightlight cast a warm amber glow across her fragile features. She clutched Rosie close, eyelids fluttering. Right before sleep took her, she whispered, "Do you think Mommy knows I'm safe tonight?" Ethan stood frozen, his hand still on the light switch. Something hot rose behind his eyes. "Yes," he said softly, "I think she knows." Downstairs, his moment of fragile peace shattered. A commotion erupted near the hotel entrance, angry shouting, the slamming of fists against glass. Security radios crackled. "Mr. Hale," a guard's voice said urgently, "you need to come down immediately. Carla's here, and she's demanding the girl." Ethan inhaled slowly, a cold stillness settling inside him. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Carla's screaming echoed long after security dragged her from the lobby, her voice scraping across the hotel's polished marble floors like a rusty knife. Even through the thick glass doors, Ethan could still hear her, the slurred threats, the curses, and finally the shriek that cut straight through him. "She's worth money! Her mother left her a check, and it's mine! You hear me? Mine!" The words clung to the air long after she was gone, leaving behind a residue of something much darker than neglect. Ethan stood motionless, fists clenched at his sides. A cold fury settled inside him, not loud, not dramatic, but deep and steady. If he hadn't already been certain that Lila could never return to that woman, he was now. He turned away, heading back upstairs. The suite was quiet when he entered. Maria sat in an armchair, knitting with slow, rhythmic movements. Her presence radiated softness, a warmth that felt almost maternal. Lila was asleep on the bed, curled like a small cat beneath the blanket. Her breathing was steady, her tiny hand gripping Rosie's cloth leg. "Is everything okay downstairs?" Maria asked without looking up. "For now," Ethan said. "They removed her. But this isn't over." Maria paused her knitting, studying him with eyes that held decades of wisdom. "Children like Lila, they need steady hearts, consistency." She nodded toward the bed. "You're giving her that, you know." "I'm trying," Ethan murmured. "No," Maria corrected gently. "You're doing." The distinction lodged inside him. Over the next few days, something unexpected happened inside the sweet, quiet moments, small gestures and gentle rituals that slowly pulled both Ethan and Lila into the same emotional orbit. Every morning, Ethan brought her warm pancakes from the hotel kitchen. The first time he knocked, she peeked from behind Maria's skirt, unsure whether she was welcome. But by the third morning, she opened the door herself, eyes brightening at the sight of him holding the tray. "Good morning, Lila," he'd say, and she'd whisper back, "Morning." He watched her discover softness in things she'd never known before, the feel of carpet under her bare feet, the luxury of having 2 pillows, the miracle of hot water, the wonder of a plush robe that nearly swallowed her whole. Each discovery chipped away a little more of the fear lodged in her small frame. At night, he returned after finishing whatever business he could not avoid. Sometimes Lila was already asleep. Sometimes she waited for him, sitting cross-legged on the bed with Rosie in her lap. "Can you read this one?" she'd ask, holding out a book. "Always," he said yes. The snowstorm outside the window seemed to mirror their quiet world, flakes, drifting past the glass in gentle waves. They watched together sometimes, Lila's head resting lightly against his arm, her breath fogging a small patch of the window. One night, as she traced circles on the glass, she whispered, "I like it here. It feels safe." Ethan swallowed. "I'm glad." Maria, who often lingered nearby with her knitting or a warm cup of tea, would smile knowingly. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words seemed aimed straight into Ethan's heart. On the fourth evening, when Ethan arrived, Lila approached him holding a folded sheet of hotel stationery. Her fingers trembled, not in fear, but in excitement. "I made you something," she said. He knelt to take the paper. When he unfolded it, his breath caught. The drawing was simple. Crayon lines and shaky shapes, but unmistakable. 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one small, one tiny. Above them, a crooked sun smiled over a patch of uneven grass. The tallest figure wore a suit for him. The smallest wore a yellow dress for her. And the tiny figure wore no color, just a soft outline surrounded by a faint halo of crayon gold. "That's Rosie," Lila whispered shyly. "She's part of the family, too." Ethan's throat tightened until he could barely breathe. "You drew this for me?" She nodded. "Because you make me feel safe." For a long moment, Ethan couldn't speak. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone, anyone, choose him. When he finally looked up, Maria was watching from her chair, her eyes shining. She gave him a tiny nod. "Keep going," it said. "You're doing right." Lila slipped her tiny hand into his, warm and trusting. Something fragile and precious unfurled in Ethan's chest. But the peace didn't last. Late that night, long after Maria and Lila had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone at the suite's desk. Outside, Nashville lay wrapped in winter's hush, the skyline gleaming through the frosted window. He held Lila's drawing, smoothing the edges, committing every line to memory. His phone buzzed. Security. "Mr. Hale," the guard said, breathless. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but Carla is back again, and this time she brought another person with her." "Claims he's her attorney." Ethan's pulse spiked. "Attorney?" "Yes, sir. They're demanding access to the girl. They have documents." "Documents!" Forged, no doubt, but dangerous all the same. Ethan stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. He strode to the window, staring down at the small cluster of angry figures gathered near the hotel entrance. Carla gesturing wildly, a slick-haired man waving papers. For a brief moment, Ethan felt something he had not felt since the night his own son died. Fear, not for himself, for someone he loved. He tightened his grip around Lila's drawing. Over his dead body would anyone take her from him? "Tell them not to move," Ethan said into the phone. "I'm coming down." He hung up, his reflection staring back at him from the window, no longer hollow, no longer drifting. A man with purpose. A man with something to protect. A father in the making. Without another thought, Ethan grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. This time, he wasn't running from anything. He was running toward the fight. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, but Ethan didn't wait for the sound to finish before stepping out. His strides were long, purposeful, fueled by a cold determination that sharpened every movement. The lobby, normally a picture of polished calm, now pulsed with tension. Guests huddled near the far wall, whispering uneasily. Security officers formed a wall near the entrance, and at the center of it all stood Carla. Her messy curls hung wildly around her face, cigarette ash clinging to her jacket. Her expression twisted into something venomous the moment she spotted Ethan. "There he is!" she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at him. "That's the man who kidnapped my niece." Beside her stood a man in a cheap suit and slicked-back hair, holding a stack of papers. He straightened his tie, stepped forward, and thrust the documents toward Ethan. "My client is the legal guardian of the minor," he said stiffly. "You are unlawfully detaining her. These papers demand her immediate return." Ethan didn't bother looking at the documents. He studied the man's face instead, too confident, too overeager, too desperate to appear legitimate. "Those papers are fake," Ethan said flatly. The slick-haired man smirked. "Afraid the law's caught up with you, Mr. Hale?" Maria had followed Ethan downstairs and now stood at his side, her posture straight, her presence steady. "That child is safe here," she said. "She won't be going anywhere with you." Carla's face reddened. "Stay out of this, Grandma." She lunged toward Maria, but a security officer stepped between them, blocking her path. Carla spat a curse and turned her fury on Ethan. "You think you can just take her and get away with it? She's mine." "Children are not property," Ethan replied, his voice calm but cutting. "And certainly not yours to hurt." Carla stomped her foot, lifting her voice even higher. "I feed her. I clothe her. She belongs to me." "She belongs somewhere safe," Maria corrected gently. "Where she's treated with kindness." Carla's eyes gleamed with something darker. "Safe? Ha! That brat should be grateful I didn't drop her at a shelter. I could have thrown her away like her mother did." Ethan stepped forward sharply. "Enough!" Something in his tone silenced even the slick-haired attorney. Carla, unwilling to lose momentum, made one last dramatic move. She grabbed Lila's ragged doll from her bag, the very doll she had tried to rip from Lila once before. She dangled it by the leg. "This filthy thing is going in the garbage," she snarled, "right where her mother should have—" Before she could finish, Ethan's hand shot out, catching her wrist mid-swing. His grip was firm, not aggressive, not violent, but absolute. "You will not touch her things," Ethan said, voice low. "Not again." Carla's eyes widened. For the first time, she seemed to grasp that this man, this millionaire she assumed would fold under pressure, was not afraid of her. The lobby doors swung open. A woman in a long beige coat stepped inside, flipping open a badge. "Tennessee Child Protective Services," she announced. "I'm looking for Mr. Ethan Hale." Ethan lowered Carla's wrist and stepped aside. "I'm Ethan Hale." The social worker surveyed the scene with professional clarity. "I've received multiple reports concerning the child in question." She nodded toward the officers. "May I see the girl?" "Not yet," Ethan said gently. "She's asleep upstairs." Carla exploded. "Asleep! Asleep! She should be with me! He stole her!" The social worker turned to Carla with a calm that only long experience could produce. "Ma'am, I'll need to review your identification and documentation." Carla thrust the papers forward. "Here! Proof I'm her guardian." The social worker scanned the top page, then flipped to the second. Her brows knit together. "These are incorrect." She held up the documents. "The docket number refers to a probate case from 5 years ago. And this signature," she pointed carefully, "belongs to a judge who retired last spring." Carla's face drained of color. The slick-haired man took a step back. That must be a clerical error." The social worker handed the papers to the nearest police officer. "These documents are fraudulent." The officer nodded. "We suspected as much," Carla screamed. "You can't do this! She's mine! She's mine!" Lila's soft voice echoed in Ethan's memory. "Don't make me go home." He took a breath. "She told me what happens in your home." Carla froze. The social worker turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Hale, under state law, we require a safe temporary placement while the investigation proceeds." She looked him directly in the eye. "The staff reports indicate the child trusts you." Ethan nodded slowly. "She does. Would you be willing," the social worker said carefully, "to take temporary guardianship of Lila Parker until the court can review the case?" Everything went quiet. The lobby lights hummed softly. Snow dusted the revolving doors. Maria's knitting needles clicked faintly inside her coat pocket. The security guards held still, waiting. But Ethan didn't hear any of it. All he could see was Lila in the hotel suite, tiny, exhausted, curled around her doll. All he could feel was her small hand slipping into his, trusting him in a way he hadn't felt since his son wrapped tiny fingers around his thumb in a hospital room so many years ago. "Yes," Ethan said. "I'll take her." Carla shrieked, but two officers stepped forward, blocking her path. The social worker made a note in her folder. "Thank you, Mr. Hale," she said. "We'll initiate the next steps immediately." Ethan breathed out slowly. He had crossed a threshold, not forced, not accidental, a deliberate choice. He was no longer just helping, he was taking responsibility. A shift irreversible. Upstairs, Lila slept unaware of the storm gathering downstairs. But soon, very soon, she would learn one thing with certainty. She wasn't alone anymore. And she would never be alone again. Several weeks passed in a blur of hearings, home visits, and late-night paperwork. What began as an emergency hotel stay slowly turned into something steadier, something that felt dangerously close to home. On a gray afternoon between court dates, Ethan signed the final forms that allowed him to move Lila out of the Regency Crown Suite and into his own penthouse overlooking the Cumberland River, a place he'd once kept shut off from the world, now opening its doors for her. For the first time in years, Ethan Hale woke up before the alarm and didn't feel the weight of dread pulling him back down. The winter sun pushed through the penthouse windows in soft streaks, reflecting off the distant Cumberland River. It painted the room in hues of pale gold, subtle, quiet, full of possibility. A day that promised something new. Across the hall, a small sound tugged him from thought Lila's footsteps, light and unsure. She peeked around the doorway, her yellow dress brushing against her knees, Rosie the doll dangling from one hand. "Good morning," she whispered, as if afraid of disturbing something sacred. Ethan smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart." She padded into the room with the cautious excitement of a child adjusting to a world where good things were suddenly allowed to exist. Her eyes drifted toward the view outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. "It looks warm," she said. "It will be later," Ethan replied. "But for now, we've still got winter." She nodded as though considering a profound truth. Then her gaze flicked toward a door along the hallway, the one Ethan had opened late last night, long after she'd fallen asleep. The room he had prepared for her. He guided her back to it now. The new bedroom glowed softly warm lamps, a bed draped in buttery yellow blankets, a plush rug, a shelf where her faded photograph and Rosie now sat like honored treasures. Ethan had chosen everything with care, making sure the space felt gentle, not overwhelming. A sanctuary. Lila took it all in. It's all mine? It's yours," Ethan said, "for as long as you want it to be." Her breath caught. She walked slowly to the bed and pressed her palm into the blankets, testing the softness like she still needed proof. "It's really warm," she murmured. Ethan watched her with a heaviness in his chest, a warmth mixed with sorrow for everything she should have had all along. He thought of the night he discovered her in the alley, counting her fingers to stay steady. a child clinging to the smallest ritual to stay brave. Now she was here, safe, belonging. "Can I put Rosie here?" she asked, pointing to the shelf. Ethan nodded. "Absolutely." As she placed the doll gently among the pillows, Maria entered with a tray of warm oatmeal and sliced apples. "Breakfast for our little sunshine," she announced, her tone cheerful and grandmotherly. Lila ran to hug her. "Thank you, Miss Maria." Maria looked over Lila's head and met Ethan's eyes with a small nod of approval. "This room suits her." "It does," Ethan said quietly. The next weeks unfolded in a rhythm that softened the sharp edges inside the penthouse. Ethan found himself doing things he hadn't done in years, simple things that demanded presence rather than efficiency. Sitting with Lila during meals, helping her pick out books from the hotel library, listening to her tiny, tentative laugh whenever Maria told a story from her childhood. Every few days, they visited the courthouse or met with social workers. Ethan always arrived early, Lila's hand tucked safely in his. He sat beside her during evaluations, answering questions patiently, ensuring she never felt alone or judged. Judges, attorneys, and caseworkers watched the bond between them strengthening with each passing day. Inside one courthouse hallway, Lila tugged his sleeve. "Why do grown-ups have to talk about me so much?" Ethan lowered himself to her height. "Because they want to make sure you're safe forever." "Are you going away when they finish talking?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm staying." For the first time she smiled without hesitation, yet amid all the light, shadows still lingered. Pieces of Ethan's past he kept tucked behind closed doors. Slowly, without meaning to, he began leaving traces of that past in plain sight. A pair of tiny sneakers on the bookshelf, a framed photograph turned halfway toward the wall, a superhero figurine on his desk. He had hidden these things for years, unable to face them or let them go. One night, Lila wandered into his study while he worked. She stopped in front of the bookshelf, eyes drifting to the small pair of boys' shoes. They were worn at the toes, the soles slightly scuffed. "Whose are these?" she asked. Ethan froze. He hadn't expected her to stumble upon them, not yet. He joined her at the shelf, exhaling slowly. "They belonged to my son. You," she whispered. He nodded, picking up the shoes as if they were made of glass. "I did." "What happened to him?" Ethan's throat tightened. "I was busy. Too busy. I kept telling myself I'd spend more time with him later. But later never came." Lila didn't fully understand, but she understood enough. Her small hand wrapped around his fingers, squeezing gently, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I," he said. "Every day." She leaned into him, resting her cheek against his arm. A soft, instinctive gesture of comfort, something he had forgotten children could give so freely. Maria watched from the hallway, her eyes wet, knitting needles paused mid-air. She didn't interrupt. Healing, she knew, always arrived in quiet pieces. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. The room was lined with wooden benches and humming fluorescent lights. Carla sat at one table, haggard and defensive, flanked by a new set of lawyers. She avoided Ethan's gaze, but her scowl deepened when Lila entered holding his hand. Ethan sat beside her, holding the drawing she had given him, a family of 3, holding hands in crayon sunshine. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Papers rustled. Tension thickened. Carla attempted to spin her story, insisting she had done her best and deserved another chance. But evidence mounted against her. Medical reports, financial audits showing money siphoned from the inheritance, statements from neighbors, and the testimony of Dr. Sanders and Maria. Finally, the judge turned to Lila. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "who do you wish to stay with while we make a long-term decision?" Lila looked at Carla. Then she looked at Ethan. Her lip trembled, but she stood tall. "I pick him," she said. "He's safe." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ethan's chest tightened. He squeezed her hand gently. The judge leaned back, hands folded. "Thank you, Lila. That helps me greatly." He lifted his glasses, preparing to deliver the ruling. A silence fell so heavy that Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. This was the moment everything hinged upon, the moment that would define the rest of both their lives. The judge's glasses rested halfway down his nose as he surveyed the courtroom, his gaze traveling from Lila's trembling form to Ethan's steady, protective presence beside her. The quiet stretched, a solemn pause that felt like it held the weight of seasons. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the tension with calm authority. "After reviewing all evidence, medical records, witness statements, and the full audit of the inheritance, this court grants permanent guardianship of Lila Parker to Mr. Ethan Hale." The words struck the room like a soft, miraculous bell. Lila's breath caught. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the decision settle in his chest like the first warm sunrise after a long, brutal winter. Carla lunged forward, shouting, "You can't do that! She's mine! She's my ticket!" But her outrage only sealed her fate. Two officers stepped to her sides. "You are under arrest for fraud, child endangerment, and embezzlement of estate funds," one officer said. The slick-haired lawyer tried to slip away, but another officer blocked him. "Sir, you're coming with us." Carla's protests dissolved into frantic, incoherent screams as she was escorted out of the courtroom. Lila didn't watch. She pressed closer to Ethan, hiding her face in his coat as if protecting herself from a nightmare she no longer had to endure. "It's over," Ethan murmured, resting a hand on her back. "You're safe now." For the first time, she believed him completely. The next several days moved gently, as though the world around them knew a fragile soul had just stepped into new light. Nashville thawed slowly, winter's grip losing its hold. Each morning, sunlight stayed a little longer. The river shimmered with hints of spring. In the penthouse, life blossomed. Lila filled the once silent rooms with soft laughter and the patter of small footsteps. Maria visited frequently, carrying soup, warm blankets, or simply that grandmotherly tenderness that made every space feel more like home. Ethan discovered new rituals, small but meaningful. Breakfasts together, evening story time, walks on the rooftop garden. He learned the way Lila preferred her pancakes cut, tiny squares, how she hummed softly when she colored, how she always paused at windows to watch the world below, as though seeing everything for the first time. And she learned him, too. She learned that he cleared his throat when he felt emotional but was trying to hide it. She learned that he favored black coffee in the morning but switched to herbal tea at night. She learned that sometimes, when he passed the shelf holding the little shoes of his son, he paused, not in sorrow, not anymore, but in remembrance. Healing, for both of them, happened in small moments, quiet ones, moments that stitched the broken pieces of their worlds back together. One morning, with winter nearly gone, Ethan found Lila sitting on the window seat, knees pulled to her chest, Rosie in her lap, sunlight warming her yellow dress. She looked peaceful, thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, settling beside her. She leaned against him. "About Mommy. I think she'd like it here." Ethan smiled softly. "I think she'd be glad you're safe and loved." Lila lifted her gaze to his, studying him with gentle seriousness. "Do you think your little boy would like me?" The question caught him off guard. His breath faltered, but not painfully, more like a wound stitching itself closed. "He would have loved you," Ethan said, voice thick. "He had a big heart. He had a big heart. Just like you." She hugged his arm, and in that moment, something in him, something that had been locked away for years, finally loosened. Later that afternoon, when the air carried the first whispers of spring, Ethan led Lila down to the private garden behind the hotel. The frost had melted away, revealing patches of dark, fertile soil. The cherry trees stood bare, but ready. Lila looked around in awe. "It's so pretty." "It will be," Ethan said. "Something new begins here." He knelt beside a small flower bed and placed a tiny pot of yellow blossoms in front of her. Their petals matched the soft shade of her dress, a yellow that felt like hope. "What's this?" she asked. "A promise," he replied. "We plant this together. And every year, when it blooms, we'll remember where everything changed." She stared at the flowers with wide eyes. "Can I help?" "Of course," he said, guiding her small hands into the soil. Together, they pressed the plant into the earth, Lila's fingers brushing his, Ethan's hand steadying hers. Maria watched from the path with a tender smile, sensing the sacredness of the moment. As they finished, Lila brushed dirt from her dress and gazed at the new blossom. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So are you," Ethan said softly. She turned toward him, eyes bright. "Daddy Ethan, can we stay like this forever?" He felt the title settle on him, not heavy, not overwhelming, but right. A word returned to him after years of silence. "Yes," he said, lifting her into his arms. "We will." The sun dipped lower, painting the garden in warm gold. Ethan carried Lila along the path, their shadows stretching together across the budding earth. A once lonely millionaire whose days had echoed with grief, and a once hungry girl whose nights had trembled with fear, now walking hand in hand toward a future built on love, safety, and second chances. At the edge of the garden, Lila looked up at him again. "Daddy Ethan?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "I think Mommy found someone good." Just like she said. Ethan kissed her forehead, voice soft as a prayer. And I think she was right. Together, beneath the early spring sky, they stepped forward. Not as rescuer and rescued, not as strangers bound by chance, but as a family born from healing. A new beginning, a new home, a new life. And that's where our story comes to a close, my friend. I'll be honest, this one sat with me for a while. Sometimes the person we stop for ends up saving us. Ethan gave warmth to a lost little girl, but through her he found the courage to heal his past, open his heart, and become something more than rich. He became a father again. That's the quiet power of second chances. What about you? Did a moment or a line touch something inside you? I'd really love to share your thoughts down in the comments so we can sit with it together. If this story moved you even a little, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep these stories alive. And don't leave just yet. There are more inspiring videos waiting for you in the playlist, right here on the screen. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm Flint, wishing you warmth, healing, and the courage to open your heart when life offers a second chance. I'll see you in the next story.